Welcome to Between Two Experts. I'm David Huether with Next 365. This is our installment of our podcast. With me today, I have Mike Petersen, our Chief Technology Officer, where we focus on topics specific to ERP projects and all the considerations to have within them. Today's topic, we move to the abandoned art of having what the industry calls a phase zero, or the ability to plan to plan. So with us today, we thought we'd bring in a resident expert around the project program management heart of these activities, Mr. Steve Edwards. Steve, thanks for joining with us today. I was wondering if you could maybe just give the audience a quick little rundown of your background, your experience, and then from there, we'll go right into the topics of what makes up the plan to plan element of these projects or the phase zero, and get into the subject at hand.
Okay. Thanks, David. Yeah, this is, my name is Steve Edwards. I have been a consultant with ERP implementation projects for more years than I care to count. I've been through multiple different types of ERP systems as well, doing the implementations for those. And those implementations are not just implementations of the software, it's also the all of the surrounding, what I call the surrounding processes that we want to make sure are taken care of, from a preparation of the client to accept the software and are prepared for that, the use of the software from day one. And so that's my background. I've got 30 years of experience, let's call it 30 years of doing this kind of project management activity with both different types of industries. I've been part of manufacturing clients, supply chain, with a focus on both manufacturing as well as supply chain types of processes. But also medical device, as well as service industry type clients as well. So I've got a smattering of all of those types of experiences.
Awesome. Thanks, Steve, for giving us that insight on your background. And I think when we talk about that, the scope of these projects that you've also been involved in over the years have usually been on the more lengthy time investment side. You know, not necessarily quick hit deliverable projects. They're ones that involve a fair bit of capital, human capital, time, and those things where there's complexity as well. And I think that adds to all the more reason for people such as yourself to exist in these projects and rollouts.
Correct. I mean, the types of clients that I've typically dealt with are large multinationals, primarily. Not necessarily always multinational, but large projects from the standpoint of both number of people on a project. They'll range anywhere from 10 up to, I've managed projects up to 100 people. Timelines, probably the quickest I've ever done one is about 6 months. But I've been involved in some of these ongoing projects with multi-phases that have gone on for 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, definitely it requires a lot of planning, which is funny enough is today's topic. Before we go into the topic, I'm going to read a quote that I thought was kind of interesting from the godfathers of project management, Kuntz and O'Donnell. And this goes way back to certainly our days of getting into this industry. And the quote reads, "Planning is deciding in advance what to do, how to do, and who is to do it. Planning bridges the gap between where we are, where we want to go. It makes possible things to occur, which would not otherwise occur." And I just found that quote kind of interesting, because I think what we've certainly experienced through our lives in projects is people go through the process of evaluating, and that's what our last topic was about, was the evaluation process to the contract process, and really trying to understand the scope of what was going to be accomplished. And then so often we've seen the projects rush to start. Okay, we know what we want to do. We've picked the partner that we want to implement this with. and now let's go. And for many years, we subtly included kind of a pre-planning phase. And the value behind that was very important. And I was wondering if between Mike and yourself, if you can talk about, in those scenarios where we were afforded that phase 0, that plan to plan phase where everyone gathered their thoughts, they gathered a preliminary plan. They thought about all the moving parts, the critical nature of the project, creating the charter. Can you just maybe both of you talk a little bit about what is included in that phase 0? And then we'll come around to what the benefits are to it. So maybe, Mike, I'll start with you a little bit because you're always the one that kind of get handed, this whole project and an element of what we need to do. And Steve, maybe I'll get you to tie in with Mike a little bit on when you did do a phase 0, what did it entail?
So very often what phase 0 brought us was, instead of figuring out what we were doing while we were in the middle of doing it, we were able to, as you know, plan, lay out exactly what it is that needed to work, lay out who was going to do it. And that's a big piece of this. Most of the time you don't have dedicated resources on an ERP project from a client standpoint. So understanding how much time you've got from those people is important. Being able to lay out what kind of work is being done when you're going to need them more. What I found was, over the years, writing and selling a lot of ERP, people will come in and ask you, how long are my people going to need to work? And you'll very often say a third of the time, 40% of the time, 60%, whatever it may be. But then they take that and they just kind of cover it over 60% of a week, when the reality is you need kind of 60% of dedicated time.
Yeah.
So it's not going to be 60% on Monday. So it might be 60% on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. But that's where this the plan comes in.
So part of that is getting the agreement, right? Getting that expectation level established early and set with the project team, for sure. I think that is a big challenge because people have said what they're going to do. And it translates to what they're going to do. Steve, what else can you also see that kind of took place in those plan-to-plan phase 0s?
Well, to me, one of the key aspects is making sure that you've got executive leadership from the client involved in that kind of a meeting. Oftentimes we'll come in, or sometimes, I can't say often, but sometimes we'll come in to a meeting like that and you don't have executive leadership from the client. And it's important because the folks that are going to be working on this project are going to need to feel that responsibility and accountability to their management group. And so when the management team is in there participating, they understand and they get the sense quickly that this is an important project, number one, that management has my back, they've got support, and that's part of what you need to talk about during this meeting, this planning meeting, is how to engage with executive management. Oftentimes we set up steering committees where we may have a couple of levels, an executive steering committee, an operational steering committee, but making sure that those folks understand that. That's a really key point. The other thing in terms of preparation for this type of meeting is to make sure that you discuss with the client the nature and timing of the business that they have. Sometimes you may be involved with a manufacturer that has deadlines around Christmas, if they're a CPG type client, or if it's somebody that deals with manufacturing food. They may have some kind of harvest schedule where it's really busy. So it's important to know and understand when the client has very busy times, because those are times that you want to try and shy away from implementing, because you're going to have new processes as part of the implementation. So people are not going to be as fast on their feet being able to perform their typical role. in the business. So we want to be aware of those kinds of things. And sometimes people don't come prepared for that kind of planning session. They don't think about that. And so it elongates the time required to do that planning. So those are a couple of other points, David, that I think are important.
Yeah, for sure. I think we've seen too many times. You touch on the executive involvement and the alignment of the executive team, making sure that they all understand what the messaging of the project needs to be to the project team, that their involvement is there and they're seen as being invested into it. I think the other thing that I wanted to touch on that is important that should be established in this phase zero, we talked about the executive alignment, we talked about the planning, we talked about the reality of schedules and limitations there. And Mike, you're part of really making sure that communication of the key project stakeholders, time involvement is important. I think the other thing that gets missed in today's world, where people feel like the tools allow them to do this work without actually getting together to do it, is the ability to agree on the metrics, right? And what are the success points where we actually stop and measure, are things going well? How are they going? And things like that. Talk maybe a little bit between the two of you. What opportunity does this upfront planning session provide to set the tone for tracking some of those success metrics that you've seen in projects before? Mike, I'll start with you.
Well, I think it's two areas. First, you talked about the executive alignment. Steve brought that up. And it's important that the executives understand how you're going to measure a particular project, how you're going to bring that out, and how they're going to be able to communicate, possibly up to a board, things of that variety, depending upon what levels it's possible it's going up to a C-suite after that executive committee, and allow them to say, this is how we're going to figure out whether or not this project's on target. And then secondarily, once that's been agreed to, being able to communicate that to the actual workforce and say, this is how we're going to determine whether this project is a success. And there are a couple of advantages behind that. And I'm sure Steve has an opinion on pieces of this. I'm sure he's seen it over the years. Everybody wants to measure a project in a way that looks best for them. And by getting it out there early on and saying, this is how it's going to be, first, you give the people on the ground the opportunity to raise their hand and say, hang on just a minute. We have these challenges that might go in with it, or we've got these additional pieces that are important. So now they've bought into the entire measurement piece of it, because they're at least bringing it out. Whether you agree with them or not, they've gotten their say. And then secondarily, they can't come back later and say, I didn't know that's how we were trying to, and I want to change that now.
Yeah.
So there are both very important factors in that metrics conversation. And the phase zero, again, gives you the opportunity to determine and communicate what those are prior to actually doing the work.
Yeah.
Too often we come back later on and are trying to fit in why the project is not doing well or why it is going well. While we're in the middle of doing it, the traditional flying the plane while we're building the plane.
Yeah.
So,
Steve, what do you think about the metrics side? I mean, you've been knee deep with the executives and, at all different levels of concern and involvement. What are some of the things you've seen where maybe it didn't get established up front and the problems it caused, or the specific metrics you found to be, reasonably reusable across projects?
Well, I think to me, there's a fairly common perception that we need to be managing activities at a very low level, very detailed level. And while that's good in some respects, you've also got to understand that there's a cost to doing it at a very detailed level. As a consultant coming in, I've got a wealth of different types of metrics that I've seen that I can propose and talk to you about as a client. But from a client perspective, especially as you have a cross-section of the management team, they may have other things that are important to them that they want to measure as a part of an implementation like this. The types of things that they want to change, they may have a very detailed list of those process changes that they want to make, or benefits that they want to see the project attain from a business perspective. And so being able to put measurements into place to make sure that those objectives are achieved is important for us to understand, not just as the consultant, but from the project team, from a client's standpoint as well. Oftentimes when we're doing the negotiation with a client, we're dealing with a set of people. And as we come into this type of planning session, that project team is starting to expand. And so in some cases, you're going to have to bring those folks up to speed. They may have some different opinions about what it is that they want to see. And so that planning session helps bring everyone together, from the cross section of the client as well as the consultants on the project team. So from a metrics perspective, there are a wide variety of them. I think there's some basic ones that you want to make sure are included, but it's not like there's 100 different metrics that you're trying to keep track of at any given point in time. Within each phase of a project, it's probably no more than 2, maybe 3 that are really important from a client standpoint and from a consulting standpoint. We've got to meet together to make sure that we're capturing the things that we need to capture so that we're able to judge where we are within a project, but that we're not spending an excessive amount of administrative time trying to capture the information necessary to generate those types of metrics.
Yeah, absolutely.
Stephen, one of the things that you brought up there, and the metrics you're talking about, we broke down into kind of 2 separate buckets. One of them is an outcome metric for success of the project. We talked about that in our last episode. Mm-hmm. And it's important for you to be able to define what is a successful implementation at the end of the day. And that way you've got an end point you're attempting to reach with your implementation. And then the second pipe that you talked about was the actual, how is the project progressing? Is it moving forward in the way that it needs to? Are people getting the amount of work done necessary to meet your time constraints, things of that variety? So it's important to recognize the difference between those 2 metrics. And one, the success criteria does require a baseline.
Yeah.
Again, we mentioned it last time. You have to know where you're at to know whether the gains you're attempting to get are realistic, how much of it, if that's a way to assess the value of the project at the end of the day. And that tends to be more important on the executive levels than it is on the ground level, who's much more worried about how is this going to change my life day to day? How is it going to make my life easier as you go?
Yeah, I think what came out of our last episode too, and what led to the topic here, is quite often the project team or the stakeholders and executives will start asking metric-like questions way too far into the project for the first time, right? And I think that's one of the things that we want to avoid with this pre-planning element is let's get that out of the way. Let's know when the appropriate time is to ask about those metrics that are important to everybody, and have a formal process to track them so that they are quantifiable. And I think it's an interesting topic on that front. I'll throw you guys another little bit of a curveball, like I like to throw some of our clients from time to time. And where does organizational change management come in at the pre-planning phase? So many articles have been written in the industry about the importance of OCM and organizational change today. What's their role in the pre-planning meeting, in your opinion? Steve, maybe I'll start with you on that one.
They're there day one. They should be there because it's important for them to understand what the objectives are from a client standpoint, what's important to them, maybe what's not as important as perhaps we thought it was when we were talking to the client initially about doing the work. So they can help us better gauge that level of dissonance when there's that difference in what we heard originally versus what we're hearing now. They can also help us understand and make sure that the activities are planned for that are going to be needed to communicate the project start from the very beginning, but also along the way helping build the business case to make sure that the employees are going to be accepting and that they understand what's required of them, because there will typically be differences in how they interact with a system or a new process than what they've done in the past. And there's got to be a reason for that to justify to the employee, well, why do I need to change? I mean, most people don't like change, period. So we've got to build that case, and that's where OCM, organization change, helps make sure that that's their real focus, that we're capturing those little bits of nuggets of information that we can turn around then and use to provide that business case on why an employee should accept the system. In some cases, it may be an easier process. In some cases, it may be more difficult than what they experienced or currently experiencing, because we've got a better process and we're providing better information to the organization so that they can do business in a more efficient and effective way.
Yeah.
Well, and with OCM, I think it's important to note every organization has people that react different ways. So your front office person is going to be very different from your back office person. It's going to be very different from your line worker or field worker or things of that variety. And just like with your project team is going to have a lot of different people in there that look at the business and look at the business of implementing in a very different way. And OCM is one of those people. Your consultants are looking at it one way. Perhaps your finance consultants are looking at it very, very tightly through a finance lens. Somebody such as Steve is looking at it through the project lens. How do I manage the project? How do I make sure everybody is going to do, who's going to be the problem in me managing this project and is not going to go along with it? And that, your OCM people, especially your strictly OCM industrial OCM people, are looking at it from how do I need to communicate this to these people, to these different levels in this organization? Because you tend to gather a lot of the same types of people in the same roles as you go through. And while consultants at some, I'll call it innate level, especially ERP consultants, have a little bit of OCM in them, just because you have to. There's so much change going on, and for so many years, it wasn't part of the process as a separate work stream. These OCM people are really experts at reading the room, understanding what the challenges are going to be, what the outputs, how to deal with them, how to communicate with them. And just like in your organization, potentially one of your back office people understands enough about the front office to keep it moving along. That's how it is with OCM and your consultants, the implementation consultants on the ground. The very back office person working in the front office on OCM. Well, you bring that front office person in there and they are just miles better at it.
Yeah.
And things that they just know from years of doing it. And that's your OCM person. And it's a much more important piece than a lot of people give credit to.
It sets the tone differently by including them up front, right? I think that there's less grinding when we kind of have that conversation and planning and support for it up front in the pre-planning phase, right?
That's right.
We've all obviously experienced different elements of this existing and not existing in projects, and that's where I kind of want to move. There are some other things, obviously, that you want to entail project by project in this pre-planning phase, which is super important, like business process review and making sure that we understand those process changes that are going to happen. Let's move a little bit to thinking about projects where we've been afforded through budget or agreement to conduct a pre-planning phase. And let's think about a project where we didn't. And I can think of one where I still have an arrow quivering in my back, I think, where we didn't get a chance to do pre-planning and we jumped right into a project, and it was extremely difficult to fully and effectively recover from the event of not really being able to plan properly. So maybe talk a little bit about when we did have a project that allowed us to do this, this was the tone of how it initiated and the tone survived. And maybe we talk a little bit about when it doesn't get included. Boy, what are the differences in what we have to deal with? And Steve, maybe you've got a couple of war stories to draw on that case.
Yeah, I mean, one of the clients that I dealt with several years ago, we did have a dedicated OCM resource on the team. When we started the quote engagement or project, we took the time. We took about 4 weeks to work together with the management team for the project to come up with what the plan was going to be. Included in that was a significant effort to understand from the management, the key senior VP level management team, what the objectives that they had for this project. And so we worked directly with them, and that went all the way up to the CFO and CEO, so that when we had our kickoff meeting, and brought everyone that was going to be involved with the project. And this was a multinational, so we had folks from all over the world in this kickoff meeting. We had the CEO come in, and he provided a very coherent message around what his expectations were for this project, what he expected out of both the people, but also from a business objective. What was the key or set of keys that he was expecting in terms of benefits coming out of this project? So what that started doing very quickly, day one for this kickoff, we started having the folks that had not been involved up to that point come to us quickly and say, okay, I understand this is coming from the CEO, so I've paid attention. Now, what do I need to do? I need tangible actions and steps that you expect from me to be performing. And so it really drove home to them that necessary involvement that was an expectation. So it was a great process to go through. Now, you compare and contrast that to a project that didn't have that kind of a kickoff. And I've been involved in those where it's the project team. There's been a project team that's been established by the client with a project manager that's typically a complement to myself or a taskmaster. I'll call them that. And when you start engaging with people outside that project team within the client, they have no clue what you're talking about. They don't understand what the objectives of this project are, what the high-level benefits are, and why the company is taking this project on and dedicating these resources. Because as Mike said, we're expecting people to be dedicated a certain amount of time. And so if they don't know that, and they're hearing it for the first time, and it's coming from a project manager on their side, they may not pay that close of attention to it. And so when you start going through the project activities and they're not showing up, that's an indication that people didn't get the message during that kickoff because they didn't have that senior leadership pushing the project and espousing what their expectations were for the outcomes associated with this project. And so it's much harder then to move people down this project path because they're not as involved. This is oftentimes a second or a third job for them. And so when they're trying to decide, okay, which priority project do I pay attention to? That's one thing that we've got to make sure of and understand. If there are multiple competing projects for people's time, That's part of what we need to identify and discuss as a part of this planning session so that we all have the same understanding as to the impact or potential impacts that could have on the project that we're being asked to conduct together with the client. And they need to understand that just like we do, so that if there are changes that are needed, then we can do that. We can certainly kind of slow things down a little bit if there are competing projects, especially if there's something that they're trying to get done and need to get done to be ready for our project to come online. We need to work together perhaps with that other project team, but that means there's another body of work there that needs to get done, and we need to understand that so that we can determine what those impacts are and how to work together with them to make sure that we're all working together and not as disparate project teams.
100%. I think an interesting takeaway that just kind of rattled through my brain while you were talking about the difference of impact when you have that start from the CEO of the project in the kickoff compared to when you don't. And when you look at the initial scope of these projects and time, most of these projects are 8 months, a year, more than a year sometimes. You talked about 4 weeks. It was a 4-week pre-planning period to really get your ducks in a row over the span of heavy-duty project activity that's going to go on for several months. It just kind of makes sense that you spend a little bit of investment up front of the executive's time, of the key stakeholders' time, who's responsible for so much more than just the success of this project, to really impart the importance and the strategic element that this has. And I think if you don't have that pre-planning meeting or meetings over that 4-week period, that whole impact to the client business gets lost. It might get talked to throughout the project, or it may happen further down into the life of the project, but that tone setting opportunity has been lost. And I think you call it a really good benefit from doing this kind of activity.
I think there's some other more detailed challenges. I think we can all agree there are a lot of places one of these projects can go wrong. There are a lot of places where it can not end up where it is that you're trying to get it. And the plan stage is a way to get in front of some of the controllable actions so that you're not reacting to them. We did a project one time, and we went through a Kaizen planning scheduling, and we laid up a board where everybody had their colored notes, process areas that they were working on, and would go up to the board and lay where they were having problems or where things were going to work well and where they could pit the time and things of that sort. And I think that does a couple of things. The project team itself, they all of a sudden are looking at it, and they're no longer looking at this amorphous 11 months of work that the implementer has set. It's right there in front of them, and they're having to make decisions right there, and that's going to be 11 months of making decisions. And so it starts to prepare that project team to make decisions, and it also lets them start to see some of the challenges that just overall the project is going to have, because everybody has got to hit the ground at different times in different ways.
They impact each other.
How they impact each other, how vacations are going to impact things, how the month end cycle from finance is going to impact things. Because some organizations, a lot of times, and Steve, finance organizations, one of the criteria is always, I want to cut down my close time from whatever, a week, 2 weeks. I've had clients actually be up in the 3.5 week range, spend the entire month closing, and then try to get it down to 3 days. 3 days is always the target. I think there was a book published somewhere that says 3 days. But realistically, they still need to close that month, and it still takes them 3.5 weeks to close that month while the project is going on. And so your finance people for 3.5 weeks are closing the month. And Once that gets put onto a board and they try and block all that time off because they know they're going to need it, you start to look at the executives and say, okay, how do you want to deal with it?
Yeah, the timeline.
It's the best idea. It's this. You've got a disconnect here. So it starts to bring the team together. You need to look for ways during this planning cycle to bring forward those things early on. And we try to do that as consultants because we've seen an awful lot. Our job is to implement at the end of the day. And it is not the job of anybody on the client side to implement.
Yeah.
They're coming into it. So part of our job is to bring forward those types of challenges. And then we won't always have solutions. We need to work with both the executive team and the on-the-ground team to how to resolve them. But the planning phase gives you the opportunity to draw these out as you're working on them.
Yeah.
Gives you the opportunity to know that, by the way, finance and the warehouse don't like one another.
Yeah.
And it's very obvious from how they're interacting. And your OCM person is watching this and they come back and they go, oh, you're going to have a problem.
So, Steve, before we wrap up today, we've got a variety of different people listening to this. It could be roles of business analysts, project managers, someone on the executive team. If you were to give them a piece of advice around this plan-to-plan phase 0 inclusion in their use, what would be one of the messages you might say to them to where, maybe we wish we said it before to other clients. We maybe bit our tongue as to why we want to do this and avoid having it maybe removed from the budget line items of the activity. What would you maybe offer as advice as to, hey, you might want to do this because?
I think the biggest thing to me is it allows everyone on the client and the consulting teams a forum to come and meet together, express what each of us wants or needs, and that the want and the need may be two different things that may be aligned. But you want to make sure that you're providing input. Everyone is providing input because everyone is a part of an organization are going to have a little bit different facets that they care about or that they look through, the lens that they're looking through. And those are important to capture to make sure that we've got the best possible plan. If we don't involve those folks, then something may slip through the crack and we may not know that manufacturing is down the 2 weeks in July for maintenance. That sounds stupid, but I've had that impact a project because nobody knew about it. Everybody assumed from the consulting side that there were no other issues from a timing standpoint. On the client side, nobody was worried about the manufacturing floor. Nobody mentioned. They knew about it, but everybody thought, well, it's okay, no problem. So that's the big thing to me is this pre-planning session allows everybody a voice to express what they feel like is needed from their perspective. And that is key to bring all of those together to get the best possible plan.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think it is. It's a safe space. It gets everything on the table. It kind of clears up some of the messy things before you do open up to the bigger audience. I can definitely see those being important. Mike, do you have any kind of closing thoughts on that as well?
I think it's kind of like a family buying a house. And you've got 5 or 6 kids around, and the executive is making the decision what that house is going to look like and what it's trying to get to. And the kids are like, no, I need a basketball hoop on the front. I need it. I need to be able to do this. I need to be able to take my football uniform off and leave it in the, somewhere when I come in. I need to be able to play my music and not, I'm going to play it whether you like it or not. Right? Is it good? Right. So it gives everybody, you go around and you ask the questions, and it gives everybody a chance to get that out in the open, as Steve said. you're putting together this house, you're putting together the way it's going to work. Now you're building a little spot for that football uniform, or when you're going around looking, you're trying to determine. Now you're building, can we put a little bit of extra insulation on this room?
Yeah.
So that is not disturbing everybody when they're playing 10,000 decibel music.
I think one of the byproducts too, from my experience, has been both as a client and as a consulting team, it forms that relationship, right? It's the duress of, oh my gosh, I have a deliverable right away. We need to get work on this. You don't get time to get to know each other. And there's a lot of importance in that, because you want those external team members to really meld with the internal and vice versa. And I think that's another thing that gets overlooked when we skip this event, is the importance of that relationship building. It builds that element of trust across process area team leads, all those things. So I think that's a really good point all three of us kind of put in there on what you can get from it and why you should do it. Steve, I want to thank you so much for carving time out this afternoon to meet with us and talk with us about this. It was really interesting to watch you work and to see you do this kind of magic with people. And I do know that we wish we got an opportunity to do this particular event more often in some of our projects, because it just didn't always get to happen. But we really appreciate your insights. It's valuable as always. And thanks very much. And Mike, always for your points. For anyone listening, if this strikes a chord with you and you've got an upcoming project and you want to think more about how to do a pre-planning event or phase 0, our offer to you, as always, is we would love to come and be able to talk to you about that. We offer a free day of consultation with Mike and his team, and professionals like Steve, that have been through this and do this every day. So if we can offer that to you and you can take advantage of it, please do. You can also follow us on LinkedIn under Next 365 for more of this type of content, and also our website at www.next365group.com. So with that, Steve, thanks again. Enjoy the rest of your summer. We know you will. And it was great talking with you again today. Appreciate it.
Thanks, you too, David.
All right.
Good to see you, Mike.